This podcast contains themes of suicide and may upset some listeners. If you're struggling with your mental health and need to talk now, call Lifeline anytime. They're available 24 hours, 7 days a week.
You know, I'd have this great big grin on me and I was dying on the inside.
This paralysis of just not being able to do things that gave me pleasure.
I hated the world, hated the farm, ultimately wanted to sell it.
Everything that was going wrong in my life was somebody else's fault.
A lot of men and women will say, I just don't feel right.
Aussies love the bush, but sometimes the bloody bush doesn't love us back. I'm John Harper, just a simple joker talking about why mental health is everybody's business and what to do if you think a mate is struggling.
This podcast is a Room 3 production and brought to you by our mates at Gotcha for Life and the Murrumbidgee Primary Health Network. You'll be hearing the lived experiences of everyday folk in rural and remote Australia. The language can be strong at times and references of suicide may upset some people, so consider who's around when listening. The advice in this podcast is of a general nature and is not an excuse for you not seeing your own GP or medical professional. Mate Helping Mate has plenty of links on our website of trusted service providers across the country. Head to matehelpingmate.org.au.
It is rather difficult to talk about my life story in regards to mental health. When it started, it just felt like that all of a sudden I'm in shit up to my neck. And it wasn't like that. But anyway, this is how it went. So around the 40-year-old mark, I was travelling well. I was a cocky shearer at that stage, which meant that I was running the family farm and shearing during the week. And I had this image of myself as a big tough bastard that could shear all day and drive a tractor all night. Anyway, when I hit 40, I had some health issues in regards to arthritis in my knees. And we were fairly secure in regards to financial stuff. So I decided to retire. Within about 4 to 6 weeks, I ended up with flu-like symptoms, aches and pains all over, but no head cold. And around that time, Ross River fever was getting around. And I presumed that's what I had, Ross River fever, fatigue, aches and pains. So I had no issue at that stage in going to the doctor. I went to the doctor, we did the blood test, no Ross River fever. I had depression, and at that stage the GP wanted me to go on medication. Well, there was no bloody way I was going on medication. So in my wisdom, I went back shearing. And I went shearing for the next 2 years. And over that period, I didn't experience the depressive symptoms that I had, the lethargy, the aches and pains. But eventually, obviously, age caught up with me, and the aches and pains, the real aches and pains of ageing, took over and I retired again. And damn me if not within a couple of weeks, the original symptoms I experienced from depression came back again. And for the next 6 to 9 months, I refused to acknowledge that I had depression, that I'd been to the doctors, that there was a diagnosis made. I just came to the conclusion that I was dying from cancer. And in doing so, I ended up sitting on my veranda for most of the day, 6 to 8 hours. And I never told anybody I was dying from cancer, not my wife, my mates, nobody. And all that time I was getting pissed off because out here you think that if you're dying, your mates, the woman who loves you, would step up and look after you. But that wasn't happening. Plus, believe it or not, sitting on the veranda was not obvious. So I'd get up in the morning and I'd go out to the sheds, whatever else, until my wife left for work. She was a school teacher. As soon as she went off to work, I'd go back to the house and I'd end up sitting on the veranda all day to just prior to her coming home. Then I'd go back out to the sheds or down the paddock on the motorbike and I'd come up at the same time as she arrived home. And I'd throw off me hat, kick off me boots and say, bloody hell, I've had a big day today. And she had no idea that I was on that stinking veranda all day. And once again, there's a slide to it. I didn't just one day decide to sit on the veranda. I'd go out and I'd decide, it's nearly smoko, I'll go in and have smoko. And then I'd probably sit around for a bit and then I think, it's near lunchtime, I might read the paper for a bit. And then lunch would come around, I wouldn't eat anything much, and then I'd say, it's too late in the afternoon now. There's no point going out. I'll never get anything done. So that's how it all builds. There's this slide down. Anyway, obviously over a period of time, my wife worked out that I wasn't okay. There was different things in my behaviour that started to be exaggerated, I suppose. Mood swings. I was getting angry at the drop of the hat. Everything that was going wrong in my life was somebody else's fault. Because I was so lethargic, I wasn't paying bills, I wasn't attending to business, that we were getting overdue stuff, electricity bills. And of course I'd be ranting and raving that the meter reader had come at the wrong date, or they'd buggered it up, or their system had done this and that. And that wasn't the case at all. Anyway, things came to a head basically is that I'd basically had a gutful of my wife whinging and nagging at me to go to the doctor because there was something wrong with me. I knew what was wrong with me. I was dying from cancer. So eventually I decided to go to the doctors just to shut my wife up, just to get her off my back. I just thought he would back me up and say that I was dying from cancer. I really believed that was what was going on. I went to the doctor. He was the same fellow that treated me before, so he knew I wasn't going to take medication. He knew I wasn't open to a diagnosis of depression. So he had me do all sorts of different tests, such as blood pressure tests, fitness tests, running on treadmills and all sorts of things. And he just said to me, "You're as fit as a Mallee bull. Nothing wrong with you." And of course that stunned me. And then he said, "You've got depression." Well, I got out of my seat and I near throttled the bastard. I said, "Bullshit. These are fair dinkum aches and pains. This is not in my head sport. These aches and pains I got, they're fair dinkum. That's fair dinkum pain I got, and you're telling me I'm mental." Well, anyway, he was panicking big time. He did think I was going to throttle him, and I tell you, I felt like throttling the bastard. So he started up with gobbledygook, doctor speak, and he told me that my brain had actually got my body to change the balance of chemicals in my body and dry out the joints. It made my body do things that I didn't realise. Anyway, he suggested this time to go to a counsellor. Once again, I didn't commit. I didn't think I had depression because at that same time at the doctor's, I actually broke down. I ended up crying and sooking. And I was crying and sooking because I thought, how embarrassing is this? I've got to go home and tell my wife, tell my mates that I'm mental. I had this vision that somebody with depression was mentally unsound, just like in the movies, that I needed to be basically in a straitjacket and locked up. And obviously that's not the case. But in my ignorance, that's what I thought. So I got rather upset in there, which upset my doctor mate as well. But anyway, that's what he recommended. I didn't sign up for anything at that stage. I went home, and that night my wife and I had, as we call it in marriage, a discussion. And we decided, the royal we, decided that little John Harper would go and see the counsellor. And the reason that I agreed to do this was not because I had depression or a mental illness. It was because the doctor was a mate, and a mate wouldn't give you a bum steer. So the advice to see a counsellor, he believed, would do me good. And that's the only reason I went. So I went along to the counsellor, and he's getting me to talk. So it wasn't like sitting on a couch and having a light shone in your eye and all the things you see in the movies. We basically had a cup of coffee and we just shooting the breeze, basically. And I don't know what he said to me, but I do remember standing up and saying, "Far out, I'm 45. I should be strong enough to hold a bull out to piss." And this fella, who was from Sydney, had no idea what the hell I was talking about. So I had to explain that comment, and I said, "Look, at my age, I should be able to do anything I put my mind to. The sky should be the limit, and yet I feel like shit. I feel like death warmed up. I felt like I was dying from cancer. I had an 82-year-old neighbour who was shearing all his sheep. There I am at 45, a professional shearer that couldn't get off his ass and do his own work. Far out." Anyway, to his credit, the counsellor got hold of it all and just said, "Back the bus up, buddy, back it up. What I think you should do is talk to your mates, talk to your peers, tell them what you think, tell them how you feel." Being a right idiot, that's what I did. I went back home and I talked to about 6 mates, and I got nothing from them. So I told them that I'd been going to a psych. I bullshitted a bit because it's embarrassing as hell. I said, I'm on the couch and I got this light shining on me, put the wind up them a bit. But anyway, bar the fact that they were very surprised that I was struggling with mental health issues, they didn't say anything. But bugger me, probably 3 weeks later, I had a couple of blokes come back to me. One of them, obviously they're my mates, so they're the same age as me. He had his father, who was twice as old, was in his 80s. And he said, Dad's out working me. I'm laying at home. I can't sleep at night. I'm worried about the bills, the debts, the whatever have taken over the farm. So he was struggling. I had another mate, a big tall fella, that was struggling with his energy levels. Had been for a couple of years. I never knew that. Anyway, he was talking about how his wife had had him on these, what us sort of blokes believe are health fads, had him on beetroot juice and crushed carrots. And he was telling me how at that stage he was on red clover extract. Now, I'm an agricultural man, went through Ant College, and I know that red clover is full of a female hormone, estrogen. So, this fella obviously had problems or else he was coming out of the closet. And I wasn't going to tell him that. No way, no one. So it highlighted the fact that I wasn't the only bloke getting whacked by the stick. Maybe I was getting whacked harder than my friends. But as I looked around, I realised that nearly everybody was getting whacked in some way or another in regards to how they were thinking, how they were feeling, and their attitude to life out here in the bush. And that was probably the turning point in my story regarding depression and mental illness. That's where my life turned around for the better.
This podcast has been made possible by our mates at the Gotcha for Life Foundation. Gotcha for Life was established to reverse the tide of declining mental health and to reduce suicide rates by taking action and having a positive outcome on mental health. Gotcha for Life enables communities to build mental fitness, social connection, emotional muscle and resilience. Head to gotchaforlife.org to catch events, get involved or donate. This podcast has also been brought to you by the Murrumbidgee Primary Health Network, also known as the MPHN for short. The MPHN's Empowering Our Communities grant is a government's way of walking the talk, demonstrating their commitment to supporting families and communities living with the impacts of drought, with a focus on mental health and wellbeing.
When my oldest daughter had her 21st, I realised that during my depressive state, my kids were scared of me. The fact that I would get angry at the littlest thing. And I can remember my middle daughter, Carly, doing something, I've got no idea what it was. She was 15. And I remember backing into the bedroom and my hands were clamped like they wanted to get round her throat and throttle a little bastard. And I'm sobbing. I'm sobbing with rage, and I'm telling you, that is as scary as hell. No wonder they were scared. But I learnt during my daughter's 21st that they were camping overnight in town and at the neighbours because they were afraid to go home. At that time, I didn't realise that. I thought this was part of adolescence and growing up, that the girls were just spending time with their friends and stuff. But they were scared of me. And how can you be a decent parent, a decent father, when your kids are scared of you? And one of the things that I think saved my life was that I've always had a vision from a young age that I would be a good father and husband. And that's one of the things that saved me from actually going through with a suicide attempt, that I couldn't put my kids or my wife through finding me. That didn't sit with the vision of being a good parent and a good father. It was more than my family impacted by my depressive state and my inability to socially interact. I had a very good mate who, by his actions, saved my farm. He had me working and doing stuff by coming out and starting me off. I didn't have the energy and motivation to do the farm work that was necessary to keep it. Yet, without knowing what I was going through, without knowing that there was a mental illness involved, he just realised that I was isolating, that I was not doing, in italics, what a normal farmer would be doing. I wasn't doing the jobs around the farm. He believed that by helping me get some of these jobs done, I would get to save the farm. And he was right. He not only helped keep my farm, he helped right me, had me going positive, because while I was working, I didn't seem to have the depressive symptoms. He came out twice a week and gave me little fencing jobs to do. And just by doing that, he energised me, he motivated me. And by doing that, it's overturned the lethargy that I was feeling. And he made me feel that I was, to the wider community, somebody worthy or significant and playing a role that in my mind, as a big tough Australian, I needed to be playing as a farmer. So on all counts, mateship really helps in this image or vision of ourselves being worthy of respect, of self-respect, and probably giving us the confidence to move forward with life, especially at a time where you don't feel like that at all. Definitely don't. Do not underestimate the power of mateship. Also at that time, I was asked by Temora to coach their first grade rugby union team. So that was a big deal for me, and that stroked my ego, remembering that I had this image that I was a big tough bloke that could work all day and drive a tractor all night. But when I started coaching the boys, I didn't want to be seen as an old fart, so I started running and exercising and doing the drills with the boys. And in hindsight, I've learnt that exercise, and if you up the ante and get your blood going, especially half an hour for, say, 12 weeks, is equivalent to a low dosage of antidepressant. So these things worked in my favour. But the biggest kicker for me was something, once again, that didn't come from the experts. This came from my wife and I. We decided on alternate months we would do something that the other would like. For my part, we'd go and see big sports games, international games. It could be league, rugby, it could even be netball. Who cared? I didn't care. I just went off because I was really keen on the coaching aspect. So, for my part, I took my wife to these big games in the big cities. For her part, that wasn't a big deal. She could go shopping. Great. What woman doesn't like shopping? The mongrels. But anyway, for her part, she'd take me to the bloody ballet, men in tights, far out, orchestras, catguts going, violins, you know. They were things that I could do without. But over a period of time, I came to realise how good it made me feel making my wife happy. And then it dawned on me that feeling happy, even for a small period of time, was better than feeling like shit 24/7. So I mean, through my story, through my lived experience, I have learnt that mental health is everybody's business. Okay? It was certainly mine. I was bloody well living it. I know it was my business. But it was my family's business. They suffered and they helped me get over it. It was my mate's business. He didn't particularly want it to be his business, but he was a mate and he did what was necessary to help me get through it. And it was my community's business, via the football club, by other organisations I was involved with. They continually asked me to interact with them. And just by doing so, helped me get through this period of my life. And for that, I will forever be grateful. When I'd gone through all of this stuff, and by no means was it all done and dusted. I mean, I still live with depression hanging over me. It's not scary, it's not debilitating, it's a fact of life, and I've had to put in place strategies that suit me, suit John Harper, that give me some joy with life. Well, that's my story. In life, shit happens. That's how I handled the shit in my life, and I realised I was extremely lucky with a close family unit that at sometimes I perceived didn't care about me at all, but they reached out and helped me. And that's what I'd like to reiterate to anybody out there who is struggling, is to try and move past your perception that nobody cares. Reach out via the doctor, via a psychologist. Reach out to those who have been mates in the past. And for any of you out there who have got mates that are struggling. For heaven's sakes, I'll tell you blunt, get off your ass and reach out and help them. Take a minute to give the bloke a phone call. Hey? Maybe it's a matter of having a cup of coffee. Maybe it's just shooting the breeze with him. But certainly make the effort if you believe they're struggling. Because one of the stories that relate to this is that I had a bloke go into a pub, shake hands with everybody there and say goodbye. His mates ring me up and they say, what are we to do? And I said, for heaven's sakes, get him help. Ring the police, ring Lifeline. And they said, if we do that, he won't talk to us again. And very simply, it comes to this, that if you believe he's going to make a really poor decision in regards to his life, he ain't going to talk to you either. I'm telling you which is the best option. Reach out, give help. Thank you.
In finishing, a reminder that this podcast featured general information only, and we recommend that you get independent advice from a qualified professional like your GP. There's plenty of links on the Mate Helping Mate website as well, so you can contact service providers across the country. Head to matehelpingmate.org.au. If you're struggling with your mental health and need to talk now, please don't hesitate to call Lifeline on 13 11 14. They're available 24 hours, 7 days a week. This podcast was a Room 3 production and brought to you by our mates at Gotcha for Life and the Murrumbidgee Primary Health Network. We'd also like to thank Riverina Bluebell and David Post at ROC, or Rural Outreach Counselling, for their support. You can find out more about these organisations and the great work that they do on our Mate Helping Mate website. Other episodes of this podcast can be found on Spotify, Apple Podcasts and Stitcher Radio by searching for Mate Helping Mate and hitting subscribe. If you've liked what you've heard, make sure you leave a rating to make it easier for others to find us. You can also head to the Mate Helping Mate website and listen there. And better yet, you can share those links with your friends and family to start a conversation about mental health in the bush. This podcast was produced by Erin Johnson, Kayla Robertson and AJ Clifford for Room 3, a production company that works with not-for-profits and social enterprise across Australia. And finally, we've got to thank the man himself, John Harper, for all the years he's travelled this country, tirelessly working to improve mental health in rural and remote Australia. And there's also Mitch, for all of her support for John throughout the years and her hospitality to our crew and all the guests who have come out to the farm during this time. Recorded and edited by AJ Clifford. Original music by Southwalk Sounds and stock by Soundstripe. Thank you for listening, hoping you can move forward, and we hope this makes a difference.